French present tense, 3 rules, follow them on this video, your problems are solved. And welcome to another session of Lockdown Learning with me, Paul Holland. This is for students learning French, probably on years 8 or 9, possibly a little bit older, preparing yourselves for your GCSEs and wanting to get the basics into position so you know exactly how to deal with French present tense verbs. In order to do it in a really basic, systematic way, what I've done is I've brought it down to 3 simple basic rules. So we're going to look at those 3 basic rules today, and if you remember these, then this is one way to approach what the present tense is and how it works, and why, as an English speaker, you probably think it's much more complicated than what you encounter with your own language. So let's have a look at rule number 1. Here it comes. Rule number 1, first of all, this rule is that the present tense only has 2 words, effectively. The present tense is 2 words. And for that reason, you need to think of it as I am doing something now. And of course, in English, you say I am doing, or she is reading, or he is thinking. And of course, in French, it's never 3 words. You never translate that middle word. You only translate it as just 2 words. And here they are. And that's what they look like when they're in French. The present tense can have slightly different meanings in English. We sometimes translate it as you've just heard with the 3 words. I am sleeping, we are eating, but it can also be translated just as the 2 words. I swim, they sleep, we study, but it can also be translated with an emphatic form. I do know something. She does sing. And in French, it would simply be 2 words every time. So always translated as just 2 words. And it can be something that happens now, is happening at this very moment. For example, I am speaking, je parle. It can be something that happens regularly, but is not necessarily happening now, but it happens. For example, every night I drink a hot milk, and that would be je bois. Chaque soir, je bois un lait chaud. Or it could be something that just happens in the universe. For example, water boils at 100 degrees. Or the earth revolves around the sun. So that's the present tense. Rule number 1, 2 words, and that's what it means. Let's have a look at rule number 2. Rule number 2 is very, very specific. When you use a particular person for one of those verbs, you have to change the endings. It's as simple as that. If you say, I'm doing something, you have to put a different ending on. When you say, they are doing something, you put a different ending on for they. Doesn't always sound different in French. In fact, it often doesn't sound different. You can't hear the difference, but you often see the difference when it's written. So let's have a look at those different forms. You always have 6 different people, and it's worth us just looking at how those work. Everybody understands the basic elements of these 6 people. So we have the I, je form, I'm doing something. We have the tu form, when you're talking to one person, and that one person is about your age, or you're really good friends with them, or they're a family member. You'll also recognize the nous, obviously the nous form, the we are doing something, and the vous form, which again is you, but it's you plural, or it could be you formal, somebody who's older than you, or somebody that you have a formal relationship with. And the 2 that are missing here, they're not that complicated. It's just that you sometimes forget which ones they are if you've got another person's name involved. So il or elle or on, I'm sure you've all learnt it like this. He or she or one does this. But it could also be a noun. The girl is doing something. The horse is doing something. It could be a name. Peter is doing something. And so for that reason, you've always got to think of that as the 3rd person singular ending. And it also comes up with the word who. If you say who is doing something, that will be the 3rd person. And that's third person singular, and here we have third person plural, and that means they. And again, it doesn't just mean they, ils or elles. It could be elles if it's all girls. If it's all boys doing something, it's just ils. And if it's a mixture of boys and girls, even one boy and 17 girls, then I'm afraid it's ils. But of course, as well, a bit like the third person singular, you can have a name as well, okay? Or names of people doing things, or the boys were doing this, or the horses, or my friends, and other possibilities, obviously. And here comes rule number 3. Rule number 3 is that they fall into different patterns. There are 3 different patterns, only 3 different patterns for regular verbs. And those 3 different patterns are called conjugations or families of verbs. And you almost certainly know what they sound like when you look them up in a dictionary. In a dictionary, you're given the infinitive, the basic form, and that form will end in either ER, RE, or IR. And those different groups of verbs are therefore called ER verbs, RE verbs, and IR verbs. So let's take a look at the overall system of French verbs. Here we go. Let's have a look at this. This is basically the way that we can imagine how French verbs work. And if you look at this half over here, you'll see that the present tense is incredibly complicated and dominant. You have a huge amount of space taken up just by the present tense. And really, this is what we're concentrating on today. Just these 3 and a possible 4th one as well here. So these are the 3 conjugations of verbs. And you can see how I've set them out here. And what we'll do is we shall have a look at each one individually. And so here comes ER verbs. Now you'll recognize the endings of ER verbs because you take off the ER and you'll add that very familiar E, ES, ONS, EZ, ENT. And therefore, whenever you have one of those 6 different people that we mentioned in rule number 2, then these are the endings that you'd put on the end. Now notice that 4 of them sound exactly the same. So here's the word to carry, and it sounds like this. Je porte, tu portes, il porte, nous portons, vous portez, il porte. And you hardly even hear any difference at all, do you, between 4 of them? Okay, it doesn't matter because when it comes to writing French, you'll need to show that you do get those things right, and that's quite important. So if you say, do you like jazz music? Then if you wrote it down in French, it would be tu aimes le jazz with an ES on the end because you've used tu. And even with longer questions, if you are in the habit of putting est que on the front of questions, you still need the ES there. Est-ce que tu aimes la musique classique, for example? And here are your RE verbs. So let's have a look at an example. I'm going for perdre, which means to lose. So I lose, you lose, he loses, etc. Je perds, tu perds, il perd. So you don't really hear the endings for the first 3. Nous perdons, vous perdez, and ils perdent. And finally, IR verbs. And for these, you have just that extra little bit of complication with the double S here in the last few. So here's the verb I choose, you choose, he chooses, etc. Je choisis, tu choisis, il choisit. All 3 sound exactly the same, but they have SST. And then nous choisissons, vous choisissez, and ils choisissent. And some verbs, you will notice, look like IR verbs, but they don't follow quite the same pattern. And I've included them here looking like this with a little extra C there for the consonant. So an example of this is to leave, partir, I leave, je pars. You lose the consonant completely. There's no T, it's disappeared. The whole IR has disappeared as well as the consonant in front of it. Je pars, tu pars, il part. And then it reappears again. Here it comes for the last three. Nous partons, vous partez, ils partent. Let's have a look at another one of those. For example, to sleep. Je dors. There's no M. We've taken the M out. That consonant has gone. Je dors, tu dors, il dort. And then it's come back again. Nous dormons, vous dormez, and ils dorment. Here are all four types together on the screen. One massive thing to mention, which everybody makes a mistake with when they're pronouncing them, is just do not pronounce that ENT in the last ones every single time. They are never, ever pronounced. So that ENT is completely silent. Il porte, il dorme. And you stop there. Good, that's your present tense regular verbs explained, hopefully in 3 basic rules. Remember those 3 rules. Number 1, there's only 2 words involved. Number 2, they will have to have some sort of an ending for those 6 different people. I, you, he or she, we, you, and they. And rule number 3 is they fall into different patterns. And those patterns, obviously lots of connections between them, but also slightly different at each stage. Each of them have their own different characteristics. Good. If that was useful, fantastic. Please subscribe and look forward to seeing you in the next video if you're hoping to find some help with French or Latin or some other subjects that I've put into my playlists. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.